Uhuru, and welcome to White Solidarity with Black Power Live. Today's episode is talking about how African resistance is crashing the colonial prison economy. My name is Ali Ayello. I'm the African People's Solidarity Western Region representative. And before we get started, if you are tuning in on YouTube, make sure you like and subscribe to get alerts whenever we go live or post a new video. And if you're tuning in on Facebook, please share this live stream with friends and let us know in the comments where you are tuning in from. We will have a Q&A later in the program, so take notes and enter your questions in the comments on YouTube or Facebook. As I said, I'm a member of the African People's Solidarity Committee, APSC, and the African People's Socialist Party formed APSC in 1976 with the mandate to organize other white people to build the movement for reparations and genuine solidarity with the liberation of African people. APSC has a responsibility to raise funds for our work, including paying for the expenses of a new Solidarity Center in St. Louis, which we will talk more about today. But we are raising funds tonight. Our goal is $500, and you can go to apscuhuru.org to donate and contribute right now. And I want to take a moment to salute our leadership, Chairman Omali Yeshitela, who developed the political theory of African internationalism and who represents the leadership of the African Revolution around the world. We also salute Deputy Chair Ona Zene Yeshitela, who has put Chairman Omali Yeshitela's vision of the Black Power blueprint on the ground. She leads the more than 50 economic institutions of the African People's Socialist Party. And we salute and welcome APSC Chairwoman Penny Hess, who will be presenting tonight. Chairwoman Penny was present when the African People's Socialist Party held the founding conference of the Solidarity Committee in the fall of 1976 and has been a cadre member of the African People's Solidarity Committee ever since. In 2001, she published the groundbreaking book, Overturning the Culture of Violence, which, under the leadership of Chairman Omali Yeshitela, detailed the complicity and participation of white people in the historical assaults and colonial violence against African and other oppressed peoples. And I also want to salute and welcome Jesse Neville, who is the chair of APSC's mass organization, the Uhuru Solidarity Movement. So Uhuru, and welcome Chairwoman Penny and Chair Jesse. Turning it over to you guys.
Uhuru, thank you, Ali. Uhuru, Chairwoman Penny Hess, good to see you.
Uhuru Jesse, and Uhuru everybody that's out there tonight to listen to this really important program.
Uhuru, just want to welcome everyone who has joined us, and as was stated, just reiterate that Uhuru means freedom in Swahili, and you are tuned into a webinar hosted by the African People's Solidarity Committee, the organization of white people working under the leadership, formed by and working under the leadership of the African People's Socialist Party to organize in the white communities to build reparations to African people and solidarity with Black power, white solidarity with Black power, and the anti-colonial struggle of African and oppressed peoples everywhere. And we're going to talk a lot more tonight about what that means. But first, I want to join Ali in saluting the leadership of the African People's Socialist Party, Chairman Omali Yeshitela. We're going to be reading from one of the chairman's books in this webinar tonight. Chairman Omali Yeshitela has been relentlessly leading the struggle for the liberation of Africa and African people for over 50 years. And everything that we understand as APSC comes from the leadership and understandings of Chairman Omali Yeshitela. And I also join in saluting Deputy Chair Ona Zene Yeshitela, the architect of the Black Power Blueprint and visionary genius behind taking the vision of African internationalism and making it real in the world. We're going to show you more of what that looks like later tonight. And last but not least, I want to join in saluting Chairwoman Penny Hess, who I'm honored to be speaking with on the program tonight, who is the chair of the African People's Solidarity Committee and who has written and spoken for many years on, in particular, this question of the mass incarceration of African people as a tool of the colonial oppression of African people and why reparations are owed to African people. So Chairwoman Penny, Uhuru.
Huru Jesse, and thank you, Ali. Just really want to welcome everybody to this important event tonight. And I want to join in saluting our leadership, Chairman Omali Yeshitela, Deputy Chair Onizane Yeshitela, and the members of the African People's Socialist Party all over the world, and want to salute them because these are courageous African people who are determined that African people everywhere, anywhere they have been forcibly dispersed throughout the world, are going to be free, are going to have their continent, their homeland, Africa, liberated and in the hands of African people to whom it belongs. And I want to start by saying that, I'm really glad that we're talking about this whole question of the prison economy, the colonial prison economy inside this country. And I think that one of the most brutal manifestations of this gap between the white population and African people and indigenous people in this country is this immense mass incarceration of African and indigenous people. We just take this for granted that the US has enormously, more than anybody else, the largest prison population in the entire world, larger in real numbers than China, which has over 1 billion people in its population. And that, we take this for granted. This is part and parcel of what it means to be in the US. And, this is an incredible reality of colonialism inside this country. And the mass incarceration of African and indigenous people, along with the ongoing police murders and violence towards African people, are things that, that we have to recognize as violence of a colonial system onto an oppressed people. According to Al Jazeera, in the year between May 2020 and May 2021, and we're talking about May 2020 when the police murder of George Floyd, as we know, just, went viral all around the world. And there was huge uprisings and mass resistance led by the African working class in such a powerful way. But in that year, between May 2020 and 2021, over 1,000 people, mostly African and other oppressed nationalities, had been murdered by the police. So it's ongoing. These two things go together: this violence of the police in the form of the state against African people, and the violence of taking millions upon millions of African people and putting them inside of this brutal, hideous prison system, what is called prison concentration camps inside the borders of the United States that we see here. And, we can also see this reality about how, in the 1980s and 1990s, what was called the crack epidemic, which was in fact the US government imposing chemical warfare in the form of a derivative of cocaine that was called crack into the African community all over the US. We can see the slander, the helicopters, the dogs, just the police state that existed for the African community based on that. But yet, in more recent years, in the last couple of years, we've seen this opioid epidemic that is predominantly white, and it's very, very endemic throughout white communities all over the US. And, we see the difference in how these two are treated, because now suddenly with the opioid epidemic, drug addiction is now considered an illness, not a pathology, not something criminal and vile as it is handled, in when it comes to attacking the African community. So now we're taught that with opioids, that drug addiction is something to be treated and cared for. And in reality, you know, more than 100,000, mostly white people, died from overdoses in 2021. So this is the largest wave of mass drug addiction ever seen in the US, far greater than the numbers in the African community. And for African people, Jesse, as you know, the situation was quite different. Crack was something made in a laboratory, and as seen in and proven in congressional Iran-Contra hearings in the 1980s, and the exposures by people like the San Jose Mercury news reporter Gary Webb, who did, you know, a whole expose on this. Crack was consciously imposed on African communities, beginning in Los Angeles up to Oakland, and then systematically across the United States, imposed on African communities everywhere. And Chairman Omalia Shatella has brilliantly noted that the imposed drugs on the African community beginning in the late 1960s, when the US was waging war against the people of Vietnam, who were struggling for their freedom and independence, was part of a counterinsurgency against the people of Vietnam, but also the war against the African Revolution or Black Revolution of the 1960s. It went along with COINTELPRO and other secret government agency assassinations of people like Malcolm X, Martin Luther King, Fred Hampton, and many others who were incredible leaders and courageous activists fighting for power in the hands of the African working class. We saw slander, destruction of organizations, dirty tricks, locking up of African political prisoners, some of whom, like Sundiata Acoli and others, Leonard Peltier of the indigenous population, are still in prison today, sometimes 50 years, 45 years in prison. And these violations, these human rights violations that the United States is responsible for, you know, it's never called out in this country. It's never taken on. And, you know, as Chairman Omalia Shatella has shown, that at the height of the movement for Black Power in the 1960s, African communities were flooded with heroin coming from Southeast Asia, and then crack. And behind that, designer laws were written criminalizing African people, things like the 3 strikes you're out laws, mandatory minimum sentencing laws, so that, you know, certain so-called crimes would mean that people would get 30 years to life, and things that didn't happen in the white community. These were clearly designer laws targeting African people. And there was the draconian crime bill written in 1995 by current President Joe Biden under then President William Jefferson Clinton, that financed 100,000 more police on the streets of the United States that were responsible for so many of the police murders that we see now, this connection, this criminalizing of the African population. And it codified federal 3 strikes laws, which was also imposed on the state level. So every state, California, you know, New York, they also had the 3 strikes you're out laws. And they intensified the death penalty and so much more. And so with this attack on the African liberation movement, on the Black Power movement of the 60s, and the criminalization that was really there to wipe out the will of the African population to struggle for their freedom and independence, there came this wave of massive prison building all over the US as part of this thing called counterinsurgency. And counterinsurgency is a war by an imperialist or colonial power against an oppressed people who are rising up for their freedom. And a counterinsurgency is a war without terms. It has no agreements, as far as how people would be handled. They do anything they want to do. And it's everything from, from murder to psychological warfare to slander to, everything possible to demoralize a population and attempt to destroy their will to struggle. And so, just behind the COINTELPRO and the assassinations and the other forms of counterinsurgency in the 60s, we saw this criminalization, this massive infusion of drugs, and this massive prison building all over the US. There, all of a sudden, there were helicopters flying over, there were sweeps of whole neighborhoods. They would bring in police vans and buses and just have, booking tables outside, not even taking people to the police station. They would book people right on the street, put them in these big police vans, take them to jail. Courtrooms were flooded with young African people. You could just go to any courtroom in any city, and day after day after day, hour after hour after hour, would be another young African coming, being seen by a judge somewhere. And all of this was based on a serious attack on African people based on colonialism existing inside the borders of the United States for African people. So yeah, we saw this. We saw African people and children, African children, viciously slandered, labeled with such names as notoriously used by Hillary Clinton, like super predator, which was the name for African little children in the 1990s, used by Clinton and many others. So it would be in the newspaper attacking African children, vicious. And so it means that the US prison population expanded in the past 40 years by more than 500%, with sentences for crack cocaine more than 500 times greater than sentences for possession or sale of regular powder cocaine used by white people. Whole rural towns across the US began petitioning, fighting, putting up billboards, doing everything possible to get prisons built in their town, creating a whole prison economy based on the reality of impoverished, colonized African and indigenous people going to prison that became a cash cows for white people during the same period when then President Ronald Reagan was closing factories all over rural America and moving production to Asia and other places outside the US. There were programs like NAFTA and free trade agreements that were taking the economy outside and moving it from, production inside the US to outside the shores of the US, which we see today. And the same counterinsurgency also destroyed African community economies all over the US. St. Petersburg, Florida, where the Tropicana Dome, the baseball stadium, was built by wiping out a very thriving African community called the gas plant. Or here in St. Louis, where Mill Creek Valley and so many other neighborhoods were literally wiped off the map, where there were hotels and restaurants and clubs and barbershops and beauty shops and grocery stores owned by the African community. All that economy was wiped out, and many, many places throughout this country, African communities became freeways. This was called urban renewal, and the African People's Socialist Party called it urban removal. And as Chairman Amalia Shatella has shown, the destruction of African community, their own community commerce left an economic vacuum filled by the imposed drug trade, creating, as the chairman said, a colonial drug economy in African communities, which famously were the only things that paid the rent or put food on the table. It was the only economy that existed that was left, after this was wiped out. But the real drug dealers, the US government, the banks, the CIA, they were not the poor and working class African young people. The real drug dealers had clearly exposed to be in the highest levels of the US government and US banking industry and many other elements of the US ruling class, of the colonial ruling class. And so this is a perfect example of what Chairman Omalia Shatella has shown, that colonialism is the mode of production for capitalism. And I mean, this is this perfect thing, because colonialism is when a whole people dominate as a foreign and alien power another whole people to oppress them and exploit them for profit for the colonizer nation. And this is exactly how capitalism was built. It was built by white people leaving the shores of Europe, going out, assaulting Africa, turning African human beings into commodities, kidnapping, enslaving, and trafficking African human beings, stealing their labor, their genius, their land, their resources on stolen land, stolen from the indigenous people, in which popular genocide, including white citizens' participation, had taken place as a clear government policy based on the colonial reality to steal the land of the indigenous people. And we have indigenous people living in concentration camps called reservations today. This is still their land. The resources of this country are here. The economy is built based on capitalism itself, based on the trillions of dollars generated by hundreds of years of the stolen labor of African people that started the Industrial Revolution, that, and not just from the United States, but from the entire Western Hemisphere and the worldwide domination of human beings called colonialism. And this same thing exists right here for African people and indigenous people. Really, Jesse, it's the only thing that explains, how there is this disparity, this discrepancy that exists. And, I just want to say one other thing about that is that it's clear that this prison economy, which was based on a move to destroy the struggle for political power and economic power in the hands of the African working class, that was the Black Power movement in the 1960s. This program, this counterinsurgency that destroyed that, created wealth for rural white America. And one of the reasons why we wanted to call this tonight is talking about this struggle, this article that was in the New York Times recently about the closing of a prison in California, in Susanville, California, and the struggle of how the entire economy of that town was based on 2 prisons filled with African and indigenous people. So we're going to talk about that tonight, and really want to look at this through the eyes of Chairman Omalia Shatella, the African People's Socialist Party, the organized, the organization of African people fighting for the end of colonialism and political power, self-determination, independence, and freedom and liberation, unification of Africa and African people everywhere. So yeah, so I just wanted to, open that up and talk about this incredible, profound situation that we see here in the United States and everywhere, that African people are oppressed and colonized around the world.
Uhuru, Chairwoman Penny, thank you. There's so much in what you just said that I want to talk about, that I'm excited that we have the opportunity to talk about tonight. And the last point that you made about, referencing Chairman Omali Yeshitela's statement that colonialism is a mode of production, is the mode of production of the capitalist system. It's something that everybody that's watching this, like, you should grab a notepad and a pen and write that down, because that is something that we want to continue to talk about and deepen our own understanding of. It's not just like some kind of intellectual point that, is interesting to think about. It's something that once we really get it, what that means, it tells us what we have to do. It tells us as colonizers where we have to go and what we have to do to be a part of the anti-colonial struggle to overturn the colonial mode of production and create a mode of production based on liberation of African and the rest of the peoples on the planet Earth. So I just want to express my unity with that, with everything that's been stated. We are going to talk about that Susanville situation of the prison town that is, upset now because their basis for their economy seems to be slipping away. Before we do that, I want to just bring up a PowerPoint real quick, just to give some images to go with these ideas that we're talking about, these realities that we're talking about. And let me see, I think, okay, here it is. So I just wanted to mention, a lot of people know about this book that came out maybe 10 years ago by Michelle Alexander called The New Jim Crow, which was about the prison system and about the slavery that goes on, the enslavement of African people that goes on in the prison system to this day. And that's part of the whole prison economy that you're talking about, Chairwoman Penny. But what many people don't know is that Michelle Alexander said in maybe the introduction to that book or in another place that
in the introduction to the book,
that she first encountered the phrase "the new Jim Crow" in the early 90s on a flyer, a goldenrod yellow flyer that she picked up in the San Francisco Bay Area that was printed by an organization that she does not name, saying that prisons are the new Jim Crow. And it turns out that organization was the African People's Solidarity Committee. And that was the analysis that the Uhuru movement was putting out all the way back then, 30 years ago. And it is true that I think the point that you were just talking about, Chairwoman Penny, that the counterinsurgency against African people, as the chairman said, was not only directed against the organizations that were fighting for African liberation, it was then expanded to be a full spectrum assault on the entire African community. And that's what the prisons represent. So this is showing the kind of actual enslavement that happens. I mean, many people know that even in the US Constitution, the 13th Amendment legalizes slavery inside of the prison system. And of course, that's not the only place where it happens. But so next slide. And also just to say that there are over 2 million people in the United States prisons and jails, which is the largest prison population on the planet Earth. That is a 500% increase over the last 40 years. You can go to the next slide.
And Jesse, I would just add that, and we'll talk about this more, but this is why it's not enough to say that it's racism.
Right.
This is colonialism. This is backed up by state power, enforced by the military and the police, just like the US is bombing all throughout the Middle East and starving the people of Yemen and Syria and the Palestinian people. Inside the United States, it uses its police, which is its domestic army, against the African and indigenous populations. And this is colonialism. This is
Yes,
colonialism. So
that's
yeah, it's really, really important for us to understand this. This is something that the chairman Omali Yeshitela has really, struggled around for the last 50 years, that it's not the ideas in white people's heads, it is the state power of colonialism that is, and when white people participate in this violence, then we're participating in the colonialism of our own ruling class, against the African population.
I think that's extremely important.
Mhm.
And again, not, as the chairman says, not an innocent issue of semantics.
Right.
They're not interchangeable terms, racism and colonialism. And to make the struggle against racism takes you in a completely different direction. You end up doing something very different than what you do when you unite with the chairman's understanding that the struggle is against colonialism. And it's actually like the most white centric, self-centered thing you can possibly come up with, that the thing that African people, like the only thing that African people can fight for, that are facing the conditions like what we see in this picture, and that what we see in these statistics about the number of Africans locked down in the US prisons, that what they're fighting for is to make white people like them. That as long as our ideas and attitudes about Africans can be changed to be more favorable, then African people will have a future. I mean, it's absolutely absurd, actually, and it's a way of trying to maintain colonialism, to say that the struggle. It's not even like, because I've even said in the past, oh, well, it's not enough to struggle against racism. It's not even just that it's not enough. It's not anything. It's actually protecting colonialism to make the struggle against racism. So I think that's really important. When African people have power, it won't matter what racist ideas reside in the brains of white people, because we won't be able to do anything about it without facing a consequence. So thank you for that.
I just wanted to make one more point, but you can show.
Okay, let's go to the next slide, but go ahead, Chairwoman.
Next slide. And just one other thing I wanted to say is that, we say that there's 2 million people in prisons in the United States, and at its height, it was 2.5 million people. And, we don't really know exactly what it is, but we do know this, that 2.2, let's say 2 million people right now are in US prisons today. But we're talking about a revolving door, so that every year is something like 7 million people are in and out of the prison. And the majority of them are African and indigenous. And by that we mean indigenous, whether they're Sioux, they're Lakota, or Spanish speaking from, these borders are stolen as part of the colonialism, and indigenous people coming on their own land that are being criminalized. So this is who makes up the population of these colonial prisons. It's so vicious. It's so hideous.
Exactly. I mean, we're talking about 1 out of 3 African men in the United States will face imprisonment, colonial imprisonment in their lifetime. And 1 out of 8 people imprisoned on the planet Earth is an African man inside the United States. We can go.
Yes, can you say that again? Would you say that again, Jesse?
1 out of 8 people.
Out of every 8 people.
Out of 8, the 8 billion people on the planet Earth, 1 out of 8 who is in prison is an African man incarcerated inside the United States. That's the fact.
That is so intense.
That's colonialism. So next slide. So also just one other statistic. So yeah, I mean, you talked about this, Chairwoman Penny, the whole crack thing. I mean, I don't have too much to add to that. It's just, like you said, it's part of counterinsurgency. And I mean, the whole assault on the African community through the imposition of the drugs themselves, through the imposition of the police and murder and slander and everything from, vilifying African women and calling African children crack babies. And it was just an absolutely repulsive, hideous colonial assault on the African community. And now, like you said, it's a public health crisis when white people are overdosing in the hundreds of thousands from opiates or opioids.
And one other thing about it is that, okay, when the US was waging a counterinsurgency war against the people of Vietnam, who were righteously rising up for their own land and to get the French out and then the US out and to unify their own country and people, while the US was doing that and brutally, we know that some people, well, that's another story, but just what the US did to the people of Vietnam.
Yeah.
Well, the US was taking heroin from Southeast Asia and imposing it on the African communities that were rising up in struggle for the Black Power movement inside the US. And then in the 80s, late 70s and 80s, as the US was waging a counterinsurgency against the people of Nicaragua after the Sandinistas won their victory against US imposed colonialism there, and the US was waging this fake war, this brutal war, then they were using crack cocaine coming in from that they were getting from South America and imposing it on African communities inside the US. Again, a war against the African community. So it's a two-sided thing. It's part of the colonial domination of the entire world.
And, every now and then a spokesperson of US imperialism will blurt out something with a modicum of truthfulness to it. And here's an example. I just wanted to read this quote real quick. This is from John Ehrlichman, who was the assistant to the president for domestic affairs under the US President Richard Nixon. He said, quote, "You want to know what the war on drugs was really all about? The Nixon campaign in 1968 and the Nixon White House after that had two enemies, the anti-war left and Black people. You understand what I'm saying? We knew we couldn't make it illegal to be either against the war or Black, but by getting to the public to associate the hippies with marijuana and the Blacks with heroin, and then criminalizing both heavily, we could disrupt those communities. We could arrest their leaders, raid their homes, break up their meetings, and vilify them night after night on the evening news. Did we know we were lying about the drugs? Of course we did." Now, obviously, the so-called anti-war left and the so-called hippies did not face counterinsurgency war the way African people did. But I think that's pretty clear, confession of what the so-called war, that as the party always said, the war on drugs was a war against African people.
Absolutely.
So, all right, next slide. So yeah, Chairwoman Penny, let's talk about this. This is really powerful. This is a poster from the African People's Socialist Party, I believe from 1989, September 1989, the National Convention of the African.
No, I think it was 1979.
Okay.
I think that was 1979 and 1980. The party was building the African National Prison Organization.
I think, okay, this one looks like 89 if I'm looking closely enough, but you might be right. Okay, so
it was built in 79 and 80.
It was, okay, so it was built in 79 and 80, and this was the African National Prison Organization. And if you go to the next slide, and maybe you could tell us a little bit about what this was about, the African National Prison Organization.
Well, it was recognizing, the party recognized what was happening. And first of all, the party was active on every front, and it was having demonstrations on the White House is the crack house and Uncle Sam is the pusher man, and recognizing that the drugs and the conditions and the war against the African community was coming from the US government. And also that there were two levels of this prison economy that was being built. One was the political prisoners, such as Sundiata Acoli and so many others who were locked up as prisoners of war of the movement of the 1960s, the Black Power movement, but also the just the massive imprisonment of regular, everyday African people, young people, things that white people would never be sent to prison for. You know, this goes on every single day in this country, and this is what, you know, the African People's Socialist Party was struggling against, and created this African National Prison Organization. And, you know, the party has its newspaper, which I really recommend everybody getting and subscribing to if you haven't gotten it or seen it, the Burning Spear newspaper. And the Burning Spear newspaper is in many, many, many prisons throughout the US, and is a very powerful organizing tool that has been there for many years. And, you know, since its existence in the late 1960s. So, you know, this is what the party is saying, that African people, like it says here, are a nation behind bars, that African people are in prison because of colonialism, whether they're literally in a prison, US prison, or they're in their own community, that the police can arrest them anytime. They have no democratic rights that the system has to respect, that they're criminalized. They, you know, just the whole African communities are just looted every single day of resources taken out of them. And this is the thing that the African National Prison Organization was there to address.
Real. Definitely. Very powerful history. And we can take the slideshow down. I think that's it. I wanted to read a quick excerpt from the party's platform on colonial prisons. And then I actually wanted to read a quick section from your book, Chairwoman Penny Hess, Overturning the Culture of Violence, right after that, which talks about Susanville, this town that we want to talk about that kind of inspired holding this event tonight. So we want to go back to the year 2000 and what you wrote about it back then, and then kind of get an update on where things are at now. But first, looking at the party's platform. So point number 6 of the party's platform, 14-point platform, says, we want the immediate and unconditional release of all Black people who are presently locked down in US prisons. We believe that all African men and women who are locked down in the US concentration camps, commonly known as prisons, are there due to decisions, laws, and circumstances which were created by aliens and foreigners for their own benefit and as a means of genocidal colonialist control. We believe that these decisions, laws, and circumstances were created and are enforced without African people's consent and are therefore illegitimate. We believe that the African men and women who are locked down in these concentration camps are victims of US colonialist ruling class justice, which maintains African people's enslavement and terrorizes their people, and that they should therefore be released immediately to the just representatives of the African struggle for liberation, independence, and socialist democracy. So that is from the party's platform, and of course from APSC, we have complete unity with that point and all of the points on the party's platform. And again, as you mentioned, one of the reasons we wanted to do this workshop is because of this article in the New York Times about the despair amongst the white population of Susanville, where prisons were the only economy, and that is starting to go away. And Chairwoman Penny, the book Overturning the Culture of Violence, which was published in the year 2000, in which you wrote under the guidance and leadership of Chairman Amalia Shatella and using the theory of African internationalism, was prescient in talking about this question. In a section of a chapter, the subheading is called Modern Day Gold Rush. I want to encourage people to go to Burning Spear Marketplace and buy this book if you don't have it already. I'm going to read this very quickly. So this is page 410. Okay. Just about every white town in the United States is vying for some of the prison blood money to bolster the income potential for their residents. 150 years ago, white people ganged up to murder and lynch African people to get jobs. or they moved west to kill indigenous people and steal their gold and land. Today, it is even simpler. Get a prison, stuff it with African and Mexican people, enjoy an economic boom in your hometown. Newspaper articles from around the country report on the excitement of white individuals and communities making a fortune off of the prison economy. In Susanville, California, there is one state prison and another under construction. Where else in Susanville are you going to make $3,000 a month with a high school diploma, asks Dave Foster, chairman of the mathematics and science department at La Salle College and a former Susanville mayor. It's allowed a lot of Susanville kids to stay here. This is our industry. Maybe that's okay, end quote, from the former mayor of Susanville. These jobs pay good money, an average of $41,000 a year, according to corrections officials. It creates an economy, says the mayor pro tem of Adelanto, a rural California town, which is still lobbying for a state prison after years of rejection. The desert has always been notorious for not making jobs. That's the end of that quote. In Crescent City, the home of the notorious Pelican Bay prison, the opening of that genocidal concentration camp led to an explosive economic growth. According to an article in the San Francisco Chronicle, Pelican Bay nearly doubled Crescent City's population of 4,500 when it opened in November 1989, bringing 20 years growth in 5 years. Annual county sales tax revenue has jumped from $180,000 before the prison's opening to $570,000 today. The average $280 million prison brings with it an annual payroll of about $45 million, nearly as much as the entire budget of Siskiyou County. Most tantalizing to poor rural counties are the employment figures. Up to 1,200 jobs at each maximum security prison, including professional positions for nurses, counselors, and administrators. There's typically one spin-off job in the community for every 2 in the institution. An article in the business section of the San Francisco Chronicle in 1997 listed the profession of prison guard under hot jobs for those who don't have a 4-year degree. Due to California's 3 strikes law and other get tough on crime measures, jails and prisons around the state will add nearly 17,000 new correctional officers between 1993 and 2005. The pay starts around $24,000 and goes as high as $46,000. This is one of the few well-paying jobs you can get with just a high school degree. The downside, this is from the Colonial newspaper, the downside, you're dealing with criminals all day and competition for jobs is fierce. The state received 30,000 job applications last year alone. So there you have it.
Yeah, I mean, it's just, it's really hard to express this, that this is just a continuation of white people participating in the genocide or of the indigenous people, or the lynchings and convict leasing and enslavement of African people to build wealth for ourselves. It's just clearly a continuation of that. And that's what colonialism is.
Yes.
The statistic that in the year 2020, 2 years ago, the number of people in prison for life exceeds the entire prison population of 1970. To just think about this. And, I just want to say, what these prisons are, these, brutal, nothing about, helping people or, just violence, degradation, dirt, filth, just every possible way of demeaning and breaking down the spirit, or attempting to break down the spirit of oppressed and colonized people. We can't even fathom what this is like to experience, but we're saying that 1 in every 3 African men and increasingly African women have been in prison in this country. It is part and parcel of the life for African people. They can expect to go to prison. They've already made prisons for babies being born today. And, I just think that we have to, as white people, we have to internalize what it means. I read these articles about how white people are addicted to opioids, and so therefore they go to the police department or the police station in their town and say, help me, help me, I need therapy, I need some kind of help or program. But African people would be immediately beaten or killed or put into prison for doing something like that. I mean, this is the 2 Americas, the colonizer and the colonized, and it's just incredibly vicious and violence that is right in front of us, right in front of our eyes every single day. I also want to make a point about this spin-off economy of prisons that we talk about in the book, Overturning the Culture of Violence, that so a town, let's say a town in rural California or any state, but at the time, we were in California because the African People's Socialist Party was there in a very strong way, and it still is. But so let's say the Susanville, prior to having a prison, it might have had trailer parks and low-level jobs and, not much going on and, no big stores or anything like that. But when a prison comes to a town, and by the way, the amount of income was in the year 2000's dollars, now it's $90,000, $100,000 that prison guards are making. But it creates a spin-off economy that means that, okay, a prison's being built, guards are going to come in. These are jobs that you can get. And so there's construction and housing construction and cafes, and a Walmart comes and a Target comes and a Publix comes, and all kinds of transformations of the town. There's Starbucks, there's cafes out in the middle of the desert, like it's saying, or way out somewhere in rural California. And this is colonialism. It's no different than white people committing genocide against the indigenous people in order to take the land. And that, the reality is in California, and I just have to throw this in, that during the gold rush, which began about 1848, and that's when actually the US government saw the gold, and they immediately, invaded Mexico and stole a huge percentage of Mexico, which is not only California, but Utah, Texas, Arizona, and all the southwestern states. But during this time, in the gold rush, the state of California paid out $1 million a year total to reward white people who brought in the scalps of indigenous people. This was state-supported genocide. And so they got $5 a scalp, $10 a scalp. It was more for children, more for men. And of course, the way that the system is, it always turns everything around and says the indigenous people are the ones that scalp. No, white people did this torture, this brutal, terroristic torture towards the indigenous people. So, what we're seeing again is an economy that's built on the suffering of colonized people. I just, can't make that enough, because, it's so deep. It's so deep to think about that when Jesse and, when Chairman O'Malley Shatella is talking about mode of production, what does that mean? Mode of production means the way goods, services, commodities are created in a society. That is the mode of production. And for us, that is capitalism. And that means that the way things are produced are from the suffering of African, indigenous, and colonized people around the world. That's the way we get everything that we have. And therefore, that's why the struggle of African people and indigenous people is for power, for the return of their stolen resources. So let me just say a couple more things. I do want to say about, we talked about, Jesse read from Overturning the Culture of Violence, this, this history that we had put in there during the time when these prisons were being built in Susanville. Now, Susanville's prison and one others in Tracy, California, are being closed due to why? Because suddenly the US is saying, oh, these prisons are so terrible, we're not going to have them anymore. No, due to the resistance, fierce militant resistance of African people. And this article that was in one paper, not the New York Times, but another paper, it's saying that just days after California Governor Gavin Newsom's administration announced a plan to close a prison in Susanville last month, dozens of for sale signs for homes began popping up in rural Lassen County in the town. We went from a market where there were no homes, said Patricia Hagata, executive director of the Lassen County Chamber of Commerce, to where we have an overload of homes, meaning for sale. According to the city's latest financial statement, the closure of the California Correctional Center, scheduled for June 2022, this coming June, means Susanville could lose more than a quarter of its workforce, jobs that pay upwards of $90,000 in some cases. Some workers could find jobs next door because there's two prisons there at the High Desert State Prison, which is a brutal, what they call high security prison, which means it's a prison for African people. And, it's saying, well, some people could stay and find a job there, but many will have to move. The next closest state prison is more than 3 hours away in Folsom. And I, just because of the African People's Socialist Party, the Uhuru movement has been involved in protests at prisons. I've been at Folsom Prison, and we knew Ketsa, who is an indigenous woman from Barrio Defense Committee in San Jose, and she fought for years a struggle to free her son, who was locked up in Folsom a lot of the time in brutal, what was called the shoe, couldn't even stand up straight. It's about 3 by 5 kind of box that people are forced to live in brutal conditions. So yeah, these prisons, this is how, white people are making their living. And the article continues to say, already Susanville residents worry about the job loss cascading down to layoffs in schools and government, as well as businesses. Other rural towns whose economies depend on prisons are concerned as well, said Stacy Heaton, acting vice president for the government affairs with rural county representatives in California. And I just wanted to read very shortly from the article that was in the New York Times about a couple of days ago, or January 10th. And it's just saying, and the title was, "Nothing Will Be the Same. A Prison Town Weighs the Future Without a Prison." After a decade of efforts that sharply reduced inmate populations, California is closing prisons. One town at the edge of a valley in remote Northeast California, whose economy is built on incarceration, is waging a legal battle to keep the prison open. So they're fighting in courts to keep this, because this is their factory. This is their generation of resources based on the suffering of African people. So it says Susanville, California, the Malden family loved their house. They bought it during the financial crisis, I guess 2009, and spent a lot of money to upgrade the tan farmhouse style home, new landscaping and fencing so the kids would have a nice place to play, an entirely new kitchen and new floors, rows of lilac bushes lining the driveway. But when word came down last spring that a prison in the town of Susanville would close, the family made a decision they never wanted to make, to put their home up for sale. We put our heart and soul into this house in this area, said Jessica Malden, 39, whose husband works as a prison guard. We have built our village here. In Susanville, at the edge of a valley hemmed in by the Sierra Nevada in remote Northeast California, there are nearly as many people living inside the walls of the town's 2 state prisons, roughly 7,000 people, as outside. About half, so in other words, every person in prison generates a great job for a white person outside of prison. About half the adults work at the prisons. The soon-to-be shuttered minimal security California Correctional Center and maximum security facility, High Desert, will remain open. When the California Correctional Center was built in the 1960s, many people in Susanville, which cherishes its small town way of life, we're not rural, we're frontier, said one resident, relied on jobs at the nearby sawmills and on cattle ranches. Those jobs eventually disappeared, and now almost every aspect of the town's economy and civic life, from real estate to local schools, depends on the prison. Over the years, the inmate population has counted towards political representation. So the prisoners, the imprisoned Africans, indigenous people count towards the population, which brings more taxes into the city and factored into the amount of money the town received from federal pandemic relief funds and state money to fix roads. So, you can read this in the New York Times. I just, wanted to make this point of this parasitic relationship and what it means that colonialism is the mode of production, the way all goods, services, and products are created inside the US, inside the capitalist system for white people.
Uhuru. Thank you, Chairwoman Penny. I think, just coming back to this question of colonialism as the mode of production, once again, and I just want to acknowledge all the people that are tuned in. We've got some great comments, and we are going to address that and, engage with people's questions and comments very soon. So continue to post stuff in the chat or on YouTube or Facebook, wherever you're tuned in. So just on this thing of colonialism as the mode of production, because again, this is not an abstract concept. This is a flesh and blood reality. And we already talked about the fact that 1 in 3 African men born in the year 2000 will be or is already going into one of these colonial dungeons called prisons. Another statistic that lays bare the reality of the colonial mode of production and the counterinsurgency against African people and the genocide against African people is the fact that, according to a New York Times study, 1.5 million African men are missing. And we'll say a little bit more about what that means. What it means is that for every 100 African women not in jail, there are only 83 African men. The remaining men, 1.5 million of them, are in a sense missing. They have been disappeared, as they say, by colonialism. And the city of a sizable African population that has the largest single gap is Ferguson, Missouri. And
which is where Mike Brown was murdered by police in 2014, a suburb of St. Louis.
He is one of the African young men who was taken from his community. And if you're wondering, well, how does that stack up when you compare it to the gap between white men and women? There is no gap. The gap, which, as the New York Times says, is driven mostly by incarceration and early death, in other words, by colonial murder, barely exists amongst white people, if it exists at all. And I just wanted to read this quote very quickly from another book that I encourage people to buy, burningspearmarketplace.com. This is Vanguard by our leadership, Chairman Amalia Shatella. And this is where the chairman talks about what he would now characterize today as the colonial mode of production. He describes it very eloquently in this book. He says, quote, instead of separate, more or less self-contained worlds existing in casual relationship to each other, there is one capitalist world system united by a parasitic economic relationship imposed by Europe upon the rest of us. The chairman continues, there is therefore no European reality separate from that of Africa and the rest of the world. That's why we're talking about not only the conditions of African people in prison, but the conditions of white people outside the prisons, because those two things are part of the same mode of production. They're two sides of the same coin. The chairman says, the entire world is now locked into a single dialectical process, a unity of opposites, whereupon the gruesome extraction of life and resources from Africa and the rest of the world is a condition for the life and development of what we now know as Europe, white people, and the capitalist system to which we have been forcibly affixed. The legal system, culture, white sense of sameness, and political institutions are reflections of this parasitic economic base. Every white aspiration and dream, every expectation for happiness and a good life, from a successful marriage to a secure future for their children, requires drone strikes in Pakistan, police murders, and, the chairman closes, mass imprisonment in the African colonies and barrios of the US, and starvation and forced displacement of the oppressed throughout the world. So that is the colonial mode of production summed up better than you could possibly hope to do. I mean, that's
Right.
That's it right there. So, yeah, I think.
Thank you, Jesse.
Go ahead. Yeah, Chairman Penn.
Yeah, I just really appreciate that. And I mean, you know, and we've talked about prisons. We're going to wrap up now, but I mean, we haven't even talked about private prisons.
Yeah.
And the fact that there are prisons that are profit-making institutions and businesses trading on Wall Street, you know, that have to be, and then when they go into states, that the state has to agree that those prison beds will be full or they will not come into their state.
Yep.
And, you know, you see, this is the reality in this country. And we're, you know, we haven't even talked about so many other aspects of the conditions and reality of prisons and how it came out of this whole system called convict leasing. I mean, there's so much more to say about it because it's so deep. And you know, my goal is that anybody listen to this, to just what we're putting out tonight. And this is just a little bit of what the reality is, that you can never walk by the conditions of the African community ever again without looking at it as it really is. And that's what, you know, our leadership, Chairman Amalia Shatella and the African People's Socialist Party is struggling for, and taught us and struggled with us to see that we can't live in this little rose-colored world talking about our next vacation and how we're gonna, like, you know, that article said, you know, we have lilacs growing all around in our garden, outside of the context of what it takes for that to happen. And that if we see this, we have to do something. We have to be organized under the leadership of the African working class organization itself, not something that we lead, you know, and do, and that we owe reparations. And reparations is not a punishment. This is the real redistribution of wealth back into the hands of the people who created the wealth, which is the African working class, and that this land belongs to the indigenous people. It still does. That hasn't changed. It's still theirs. And that we owe reparations. This is everything we had, just what Jesse just read, every dream and aspiration, everything that we've ever wanted or thought that we created or we did it based on the suffering of somebody else, of an African, of indigenous, of Arab, of Asian, of, colonized person around the world. And that's why the African People's Socialist Party is struggling for power. It doesn't give a damn what your thoughts are. It is struggling for the power to protect the African community with its own state power so that a white person can never hurt them again. Whether what your thoughts are in your head, they really don't give a damn.
Yep.
But take a stand, pay reparations, join and win other white people to be part of organization, the Uhuru Solidarity Movement, under the leadership of this struggle for power in the hands of the African working class. And, this year is the 50th anniversary of the African People's Socialist Party. Chairman Omali Shatella and this party, which is now based all over the United States, in Europe, in the Caribbean, in South Africa, and many other places throughout the continent of Africa, is there carrying on the legacy of the incredible movement of Marcus Garvey in the 1960s that was Africa for Africans at home and abroad. That is still going on, that African people are going to be free and liberated. And this is the world. This is our struggle. This is our revolution. There's not going to be some white struggle for socialism and liberation. I mean, we are under the leadership of those who have made up the foundation of the system on whose backs we stand. And it is a beautiful struggle. It's a struggle for power. It is a struggle that it can be seen in one example of it in the Black Power Blueprint here in North St. Louis. So I just want to show you a little bit about what the Black Power Blueprint is. You can also see it on blackpowerblueprint.org. All the projects, everything, the party is taking territory, rebuilding old dilapidated buildings, or tearing them down, building community gardens and economic projects by and for the leadership of the African working class. So let's just show this new video, and then we're gonna open it up and have a discussion and call on people to join the Uhuru Solidarity Movement. And you can go to uhurusolidarity.org to do that. Uhuru.
So Black Power Blueprint means that I will not want everybody to enjoy and get a chance to see another side of North St. Louis.
The Black Power Blueprint in North St. Louis was born following the police murder of Mike Brown in 2014. The Black Power Blueprint is testimony to the fact that Mike Brown and the hundreds of other Black people killed by the Colonial Police did not die in vain. The African People's Education and Defense Fund and Black Star Industries believe we must go beyond protest. We must build institutions of economic and political power in the hands of the Black working class community. In 2017, we initiated the Black Power Blueprint in North St. Louis under the bold and innovative leadership of Onazene Yeshatella, president of the African People's Education and Defense Fund, and we have already transformed our community. We purchased and renovated the Uhuru House at 4101 West Florissant Avenue, which was ready for use by early 2018. We bought 2 adjacent buildings down the street at College and West Florissant. In 2019, we demolished the corner building, which is slated to become a community basketball court. Even during the pandemic, we didn't miss a beat And throughout the year 2020, we completed the stage in the outdoor space, installed a wrought iron fence, and then planted the garden.
This is powerful because you're here.
We completely renovated the fourplex apartment building on College Avenue that will provide housing for our African Independence Workforce Training Program for our brothers and sisters coming out of the prison system. We also demolished 2 other nearby buildings on West Florissant to make way for retail shops and contracted with the LRA for property designated for an African women's facility. In 2021, we installed an electronic sign on the side of the Uhuru House. We had a huge victory in June 2021 when we launched our One Africa, One Nation Farmers Market with a grant from the USDA. The initiative of the Black Power Blueprint has mobilized the North St. Louis African community and won supporters, volunteers, and donors from every part of the city and around the world. Some make donations as a stand of reparations to the African community.
We believe in the democratic anti-colonial right to be able to have community control of every aspect of our lives.
Many community members have expressed what the Black Power Blueprint means to them.
You see the money going back into the community.
We want to build our neighborhoods to get our families back.
Volunteer and donate at blackpowerblueprint.org.
Uhuru.
Uhuru. Uhuru, well, wow, that was a beautiful video and just goes to show the brilliance and genius of African People's Socialist Party and what they're building on the ground. And just want to salute that incredible study that was given by Chairwoman Penny and Chair Jesse. That was absolutely profound and really laid out the horrific nature of the colonial prison system. And the opportunism that white people in order to forward the prison economy and how we benefited from it. But you saw, at the end, the Black Power Blueprint and what the party is doing to put power into the hands of the African working class. So Uhuru to that, and we will be going into Q&A shortly. So please go ahead. I've seen the chat blowing up, but please go ahead. If you haven't already, submit your questions in the Zoom Q&A feature or in the YouTube or Facebook chat. And before we go to our question and answer, we want to tell you about how you can get involved in solidarity with African people's struggle for liberation. So first, we want to talk about how people can contribute to our goal tonight to raise $500 for the Uhuru Solidarity Center. And Comrade Ruby in Philadelphia, who works at the Uhuru Furniture Philly, will be joining me for this part of the program. So Uhuru Ruby.
Uhuru Ali, thank you so much. And I just really, really appreciate that powerful presentation by Penny Hess and Jesse Neville. This is such important information for us to look at, to understand through the lens of African people, through the lens of the African revolutionary political theory of African internationalism. And, it's just so chilling in so many ways, to like what they were saying. All white people have participated in genocide. All white people owe reparations. And it's so important to discuss this. And we go beyond talk. We unconditionally unite with the movement of African people who are struggling to be free and self-determining people, and who are, to free themselves from the colonial prison system, which has been so clearly exposed to affect every aspect of the African community. It is part of the colonial mode of production, and it is a huge example, but every institution that we see here in America is part of the colonial mode of production. And this movement gives us a way to make a genuine contribution to the work that the African community is doing, struggling to transform the colonial conditions that exist when we get organized as white people under the leadership and strategy of the African working class. And one of the things that the African People's Solidarity Committee is doing is that we have opened up a new institution, the Uhuru Solidarity Center, which is located at 2654 Gravois Avenue on the south side of St. Louis, in a building that is owned by the Uhuru movement, owned by Black Star Industries and the African People's Socialist Party. It's not owned by us, but it is our responsibility to build it, to grow it, and to use it to bring other white people into this work. And the party's strategy combines building dual and contending power institutions like we just saw in St. Louis and like Uhuru Furniture is in Philadelphia, and over 50 institutions of African self-determination. But it combines that with a growing movement for the unity and freedom of African people worldwide. And Black Power Blueprint on the north side of St. Louis includes so many projects like we just saw in the video, the farmers market in the middle of the food desert, community gardens, a basketball court that is going to be, the funds are raised for that by people like you in this meeting, and that construction will start as soon as the weather warms up. There's a fourplex that we saw in the video where the African Independence Workforce Program, where people can live coming out of the prison system to participate in the African Independence Workforce training programs, all dual power in the hands of African workers. And our responsibility is taking this out to the white community in South St. Louis and everywhere where white people are, popularizing the position in the world that as white people, we refuse to live at the expense of the Black community. We are going beyond protest. We are part of changing the conditions in the world, not as charity, but tied to the strategy for African self-determination. And we want everybody to get a chance to see the new Solidarity Center. And we're going to show you, some pictures of that just in a second. And, it makes this center, this building, contends with all the violence and war that we see in the world and makes the stand of white reparations to African people real in the world. So people can walk down the street and participate. People can find it. This is a new period. The party has worked since 1982. And they said, we are going to make reparations to African people a household word. And they did it starting in 1982 with the World Tribunal on Reparations. And now, everywhere we look, people are talking about reparations, including the presidential candidates in the last election. And this is a very historic and rapidly changing period where the money that we're raising today is for the center's expenses. We want to thank everybody who has already contributed. And so far, we have raised over $150 so far towards our $500 goal. So we are on the roll here, and we're going to show, hold on one second. We are going to show some slides, and then, we want to call on everybody to donate. Okay, so ready? We're going to start showing these slides with recent updates of what's going on with the Solidarity Center. I'm going to start with, this is like a mock-up of the front of the building, and phase 2 is going to be completed in the first quarter of 2022. Next slide. We've had 6 work days since November. We've completed phase 1, which is the main room when you walk inside the building. It includes the office of the Uhuru Solidarity Movement, a bathroom, and another small office to the left of the photo. Next slide. As you can see here, the floor was like ugly concrete, and we transformed it into beautiful, painted it with a beautiful dark red with epoxy coating, fresh white walls, and a black semi-gloss trim. This is a gorgeous looking building. And this is the view, next slide. This is the view looking out from the front of the building on Gravois Avenue. We'll be getting curtains, and we're going to paint the beautiful Congo design in the arc shape above the windows. Next slide. Another view of the main room. We're going to use this area to build a storefront for Uhuru Planet, which is, you can see in this displays, which is t-shirts, and we're going to sell other Buy Black Power products. Next slide. We had to fix some of the concrete, patch up some of the concrete in the office. Next slide. We removed old shelving. Next slide. We did some work on the upstairs bathroom. Next slide. We've already been holding events in the center, even though it's not finished, such as volunteer actions, a potluck, film nights, political education studies led by Chairwoman Penny Hess. We've also increased sales for Uhuru Planet, reparations apparel. Next slide. We wouldn't have been able to hold these events if it wasn't for our amazing volunteers. So far, like we said, we've had 6 work days to complete the renovations of painting the walls, the trim, repairing the concrete and the floor, painting the floor. Next slide. Here are some more photos from our volunteer work days. Next slide. Working on the floor and windows. Next slide. More volunteer work days. Next slide. We have also begun to set up a space where we can use for live broadcasts with a background of historical and iconic photos from the African Liberation Movement. Next slide. This is another shot of the Uhuru Planet display. You can also see part of the Buy Black Power table, including the Burning Spear newspaper, the books, Decolonés, hair and natural beauty products, and more. Next slide. This is the last slide, and on the left, the current view from the street, and on the right is a concept for the new signage and the design for the front of the building. Next slide. And this is the building where we can gather as white people under the leadership of the African Revolution as part of that strategy to organize and build this movement for reparations. And this is unique. This is in the white community. This is how we can really bring other white people. We're going to popularize that this is the stance that white people need to take. If you agree with what you saw, what you heard in this really powerful discussion that we've had so far, the center is a way you can join it, but we can also all contribute right now. And like Ali said, we have a goal to raise $500. I am going to donate $50 tonight, and we've already had 3 other donations of $50, and that includes Ali in Philadelphia, Uhuru Ali, Leah in Minneapolis, Uhuru Leah, Lisa in Minneapolis, $50. And so right now we have raised $200. So we only need to raise $300. Okay, wait, we've raised $225. I don't know who that other 25 is. Okay, another 25 by Penny Hess. Thank you so much, Uhuru Penny. We have left to raise $275. Now, when I checked a little while ago, there was 27 people that were just on Zoom, but there's a whole bunch of other people on some other platforms. So if everybody puts in $10, we'll make it. But some people can put in more than that, and we really want to encourage everybody to dig deep. We are going to make this happen. The resources are in our community, and it was made so clear from the last discussion about how from the white community our prosperity comes. Okay, we've raised $250 now. We got $25 from Jesse Neville, $250 to go. We are halfway there. We can do this. And, we can put in these resources. This is how we can invest in a new type of society. Everything we see right now in the media is just like going from one disaster to another. What can get worse? Well, guess what? The very next day, something gets worse. It looks like America is going to go to war against Russia, probably. There's like all this stuff, disaster happening. What's our other alternative? Going with Biden? But this gives us a way that we can be part of something positive that is moving forward right now. The African movement, the African revolution, the movement for self-determination is making, positive institutions of economic development and self-determination happen in the world. It is changing the conditions. It is tied to worldwide transformation, and they're calling on us to be part of it. And we can donate. We can donate, we can dig deep, we can do whatever we can pool our money, and we can make this happen. Okay, I'm getting another text. Let's see. We have now raised $270, so another $20 came in. Okay, so that was $20 from Renee Nassar. Okay, so that means we only need to raise, now $280 has come in. Okay, fantastic, very exciting. I'm seeing another text from MQ. That last $10 was from MQ in Gainesville. So that means we only need to raise $220 to meet our goal. That is excellent. And while more people are putting in, and you see, does everybody see where to put it? There's a link in the chat in all the different platforms of where you can donate and say it. Okay, where you donate is, let me find it. Hold on one second. Oh, apscuhuru.org/donate. apscuhuru.org/donate is where you can go to donate. So please jump in and donate. And we're going to reach our goal tonight. We want everybody to chip in. And another way to take action right now is to become a member of the African People's Solidarity Committee. After hearing the way that, Chairwoman Penny Hess and Chair Jesse were speaking tonight, it's like, I want to be part of that. I want to be part of that stance in the world. I want to have their courage, their honesty and strength, and their, unity with the African Revolution, taking on this work, taking responsibility for our relationship to the conditions in the world. We can do this, and that is the liberation for us. When we make the commitment, that we want to see the new world, we want to see African people free. We don't want to be benefiting off African people being locked up in prison. We don't want to be benefiting off of African people dying of COVID more often, 3 times more often than white people die of COVID because of the lack of availability of health resources. We don't want to be, prosperous because African people are having, okay. Len in St. Louis also donated, so we only need $185 more to meet our goal. So we are turning this around. The new way forward for white people is reparations. We say unity through reparations. Go to apscuhuru.org if you want to /donate to donate, and apscuhuru.org to join. Fill out a form. We want people to join the African People's Solidarity Committee. Join the Uhuru Solidarity Movement. Someone from our membership office will contact you in 24 hours. We want to encourage everybody to participate in this work. And we are building a huge and strong movement of white solidarity with Black power under the leadership of the African People's Socialist Party, we are popularizing this stance. This is the way forward, you know, that we can rectify the 600 years of genocide that we as white people have participated in. This is a new stance. This is a way we can be part of a positive future. And I encourage everybody to continue. We're almost there. Continue to donate, sign up to join, participate in the question and answers. Anyway, that is what I got. I'm going to turn it back to you, Allie. Uhuru, thank you all so much. Thank you to everybody who donated. And we want to continue. We're going to continue with the program. We really want to encourage everybody to continue to donate and sign up to join. Uhuru.
Uhuru Ruby. Great call to donate and call to join. Just want to unite with people to go ahead and donate, fund the Solidarity Center, and join the African People's Solidarity Committee. So as we head into our Q&A, I want to recognize where we have some people tuning in from today. So we have people from Mesa, Arizona, Louisville, Kentucky, Gainesville, Florida, St. Louis, Missouri, Minneapolis, Minnesota, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, Marion County, Georgia, St. Petersburg, Florida, Newfoundland, Canada, Tulsa, Oklahoma, New York City, and Oakland, California. And we have quite a few comments and some questions that have come through the chat. So want to appreciate people's participation in that. And you can still go ahead and put your comments and questions in the chat while this Q&A is going on. So the first comment that we have is from Elizabeth in Newfoundland, Canada, that said, so destructive. It's so heart-wrenching to hear it spoken. Thank you for your wisdom and knowledge. Elizabeth. We have Abby Havens in YouTube regarding how capitalism is founded on colonialism, who said, man, I knew this was going on, but never such details. This definitely puts things into perspective. And then wrote later, I will say concentration camp is an accurate description. I've never heard prisons described like that, and it will forever stick with me. So right on, Abby. Uhuru.
Abby.
Yeah, appreciate that.
Angelica in St. Louis wrote, and it's not only that rural white people benefiting from work as prison guards, but also from the economy needed to run the prisons, most of all privatized medical services. Uhuru. And then Angelica followed that with a question. So reparations can help rebuild the destroyed Black communities to counteract this devastating dynamic, like with the impressive Black Power Blueprint project. My question, what is the best way to deal with the prison system itself? And then also asked, in addition to that, so many Black prisoners are locked up for life, so many innocent and are languishing in solitary confinement. How can we support their struggles? So I just want to turn it over to you, Chairwoman Penny and Chair Jesse.
Uhuru, I want to thank people for those comments and for the donations and also, for the questions. And yeah, I mean, how can we support, what is the best way to deal with the prison system? The best way to deal with it is the struggle, is standing in solidarity and under the leadership of the struggle organized by the African working class for power over their lives. That there's no amount of reform of this prison system. It's not about that. There's just so many things, as has been said here. The immense economy that's built up around prisons. We didn't even go into all that. The vending machines, the prison phone system where African people, prisoners and prison people have to call, collect, and a family might have $1,000 a month just to talk to their loved ones on, in a very brief way. The phone systems of the prisons make billions of dollars alone, the uniforms, the food, the everything about it is something that, you know, makes a ton of profit for entrepreneurs, for people, you know, for white people who are coming in to, you know, to make money based on the suffering. And the best way to deal with it is for African people to be struggling for African liberation, struggling against colonialism, ending a system built on the colonizers and the colonized, built on some people having power and wealth based on the suffering of somebody else. That can't be reformed. That has to go. That has to go. This system has to end. That's all. There's no way to make a system built on assaulting African people and the people on the planet Earth for the benefit of a tiny percentage of the world's population. There's no way to make that better. It has to go. There has to be a new world. And the new world is the vision that we saw in the Black Power blueprint and what it means, you know, for there to be a system based on the needs of the people, based on the brilliance and genius of the people, for the benefit of the people, not for profit. And you were talking about the medical system. How can, you know, and there's so many people in solitary confinement. Yes, it's hideous. African people are in prison in solitary confinement for 30 years. I mean, we can't even fathom that. You know, this is savage. This is brutal. This is man's inhumanity to other human beings in the deepest possible way. And there are so many people in prison for life. There are children in this country sentenced to prison for life.
Yep.
I mean, that is a violation of international law. Not that that matters to the United States or anything else, but in many countries in the world, imprisonment of children is not allowed. Only in the United States are there so many, you know, children. So this is the answer. The answer is African people have to struggle for power, for their liberation, for the return of their stolen resources, for their children, for their culture. And it has to be, this is why the African People's Socialist Party is fighting for socialism. It is not a profit motive. It means everybody is going to have a house. Everyone is going to have food. Everyone is going to participate in society. Everyone is going to go to school. Everyone is going to be taken care of in the medical system. That's the only way. That is the only way. I mean, this system is so vicious. It is destroying the planet itself after driving literally hundreds of millions of indigenous and African people extinct. You know, now, you know, we face extinction of all of humanity based on a system that will, you know, they don't care about fossil fuels or anything else. They want to keep the profit. They want to keep the profit, and they'll bring down the system to do it. It has to go.
Uhuru. Right on. Thank you, Chairwoman Penny, for that response. So next question is from Matthew Durbin on YouTube. Says, I have one question. When was the protest at the World Bank and IMF and Federal Reserve? I still have the video from last April where Jesse mentions a major protest. We live in a central banker ran system, and BlackRock, Vanguard, the Fed Reserve, and Wall Street control the Congress and the rest of it. I'd love to see us challenging the beast. Uhuru.
May I take that one on, Chairman Penny? Yeah. Oh, thank you, Matthew, and glad you're here with us, Uhuru. Good to see your name on here. And you know, we absolutely are planning to carry out these actions that you're talking about and carry out bold political actions targeting the Wall Street banks, the Federal Reserve, the entire, you know, colonial capitalist ruling class for reparations to African people, because as this whole webinar has shown, it's, Wall Street is built on the enslavement of African people. And all of the major banks profit from mass incarceration of African people, profited from the enslavement of African people in every other way. The event that you're talking about last April was our national convention, which was called Make Wall Street Pay Reparations, where we were putting out a plan to hold a demonstration at the World Bank and IMF conference that was scheduled for October of that year. They ended up canceling that conference because of COVID. So then we were planning to hold one at the spring conference this year, but they've canceled that one because of COVID. But we are not going to let that stop us from carrying out these bold actions. We definitely want to plan a coordinated national day of actions targeting Federal Reserve banks throughout every region of the United States. And we're looking at doing that in the next few months, in the spring of this year. And also on the day of the kickoff of our national convention, March 18th, Friday, here in St. Louis, we will be holding a major bold action at the St. Louis Arch, which is a famous or infamous symbol of colonial genocide. That's sort of like a colonial monument here in this city. So we plan to hold a major action there. So it's definitely at the top of our agenda, and I will be reaching out to you, Matthew, to get you involved in making these things happen. I'm really excited that you're raising this question and that you're interested in, you're fighting to make this happen. And anybody that wants to be a part of, taking to the streets and bringing white solidarity with Black power and the revolutionary demand for reparations to African people right into the heart of colonial capitalism should get in touch and go to, email us at info@uhurusolidarity.org and join our political action committee that will be responsible for coordinating these actions in the next few months. So thank you, Matthew. Uhuru.
Uhuru, and I really appreciate what he's saying. I'd love to see us challenge the beast. Well,
that's right.
Yeah, the African People's Socialist Party has been challenging this beast for over 50 years, and it's really powerful and it's very exciting. And we're going to take this on. It's going to be exciting to go in front of the Federal Reserve and Wall Street, and really fight the moneyed sector to pay reparations to African people.
Yes.
Uhuru. I just want to give an update on the fundraising real quick before we keep going. We had contributions from Paula in Mesa, Raya in Chicago, Diane in Gainesville, and Abby in Missouri, and we are now at $420. So we only have $84 to go, comrades. Really want to appreciate all the contributions that have been made. And if you haven't donated yet, you can go to apscuhuru.org/donate. And we just got a new contribution from Johan in St. Pete. So now we're at $440, only $60 more to go. Uhuru, comrades.
Uhuru.
So we have one more comment, which is from Paula, who said, white people love to buy products made in America/USA. This means that the product was made in a prison. Many of these huge companies have their products produced in this place.
Absolutely. That is so true. That this is a prison, and African people are in the prisons are given 20 cents a day, or, it's enslavement. And that is, legal under the 13th Amendment in the United States, that enslavement is legal for punishment of a crime, quote unquote. And so, so there's just a huge amount of production. Factories are in prisons. And this is the reality. Again, the colonial mode of production. This is how goods and services and products are made and created inside a system of colonial capitalism inside this country. So I really appreciate that, Paula.
Uhuru, thanks, Paula, and thanks, Cheryl and Penny, for that answer. And thanks so much to everyone for your questions. Before we head into announcements and conclude today's event. Chairwoman Penny and Chair Jesse, just want to see if you have any closing comments that you'd like to make this evening.
Well, I just really want to appreciate everybody for coming on. I appreciate, you, Chair Jesse, and Allie, and Ruby, and all the comrades who participated in this event, and everybody who was on tonight and had such a lively discussion. And that, again, we can't be consumers of information. If we understand this, we have to do something, and really calling on you to become a member of the Uhuru Solidarity Movement, of the African People's Solidarity Committee, under the leadership of the African People's Socialist Party, and to go into the white community, to organize other white people, to recognize our truest interest is to be on the side of the people, to rectify our relationship to African, indigenous, and oppressed peoples of the world, to be part of humanity, to, reparations is redemption, and this is our revolution. This is the way that we can be part of changing this earth under the leadership of African people and oppressed and colonized peoples around the world. Uhuru.
Uhuru.
Uhuru, Chairwoman Penny. Uhuru. Well, I just really want to appreciate having both of you on this evening. It was really powerful discussion, and just want to appreciate the leadership, Chairwoman Penny, that you provided in the presentation, as well as USM Chair Jesse. We're going to move on into announcements. We've got some exciting announcements for you all today coming up. February 11th to the 14th is going to be, and this is going to be online, attend the African People's Socialist Party's 2022 plenary themed Relentless 50 Years of African Leadership Towards African Redemption. And you can register at apsplenary.org. You definitely don't want to miss that plenary that's going to be coming up in just a few weeks. On March 18th through the 20th is the Uhuru Solidarity Movement will host its annual national convention titled Unity Through Reparations, Reparations Through Organization, and keynote presentations by Chairman Omali Yeshitela and African People's Solidarity Committee Chairwoman Penny Hess. And this convention will win white people to understand that our responsibility, our interests, and our future is found in the revolutionary anti-colonial struggle for reparations to African people. The convention will kick off with a major, bold political action at the St. Louis Arch on Friday, March 18th. And for more information and to register, you can go to uhurusolidarity.org/register. Join the Omali Taught Me Sunday Studies every Sunday from 7 a.m. to 9 a.m. Central. You can find this on facebook.com/omali.yeshitela or youtube.com/uhurutv. And the chairman is currently reading the latest political report to this upcoming 2022 plenary. And for more African internationalist news and analysis, get the Burning Spear newspaper. You can subscribe to the print or digital edition at theburningspear.com/subscribe. Order a bundle to distribute it in your community at burningspearmarketplace.com. And you can find details about these events and more upcoming events at theburningspear.com/events. And make sure to visit uhurusolidarity.org and apscuhuru.org to learn more about the Uhuru Solidarity Movement, the African People's Solidarity Committee, and how you can become a member and join the work to build white solidarity with Black power and unity through reparations. So thank you so much to APSC Chairwoman Penny Hess and USM Chair Jesse Neville, and to every single person that participated in today's study. And that concludes today's event. We'll see you next time. Uhuru.